Welcome to Gideon's War on Crunch, the podcast exploring everything in mental health and picking apart the topic of crunch, exploring different things. Today I am joined, I'm very pleased to have Dave Ranyard, the founder and CEO of Dream Reality Interactive, a games and interactive studio based in London. Hey Dave, and welcome.
Hi, thanks for having me. It's very exciting to be here.
It's a pleasure. You have a vast experience in the game industry, as I understand. How many years have you been working in games?
I think I started in 97, so 25, 26 years. Too many, maybe. No, I've loved every minute of it, or most of it. Some of it was a bit crunchy, which I'm sure we'll get into.
Oh, absolutely. And I actually want to double click on that straight away. So I think a lot of people maybe can't remember or haven't worked in games at that time. So I really want to hear what the experience was like and what it was like to create and be on the forefront. But still, you said it was very crunchy. So could you elaborate on that?
I think there's a few strands to unpick, but ultimately, sort of certainly back at the beginning of the century, there was a kind of a philosophy that if you weren't suffering, it wouldn't be a great game. So you had to suffer for your art. But equally, people didn't really know what they were doing. I guess over the years, it's become apparent that traditional project management methods don't necessarily work for something like software development. So you can't always say, the user interface will take 2 months to build, and then the gameplay will take 4 months to build, and then the back-end system will take 2 months. It's a much more iterative process. And so we try and have these deadlines that were imposed that didn't really work for what we were doing. So then people would have to crunch. I can remember the first project I was on that was full of crunch. And it was also disparate across the team in that I got it a lot worse, actually, because it was a football game, as in soccer, and there was a whole team making the game, the animations, etc., etc. And then I was the menus programmer. But the menus, it turned out, wasn't just the menus. It was all the competitions, all the data, everything outside actually kicking the ball on the pitch. And to be honest, in hindsight, we probably should have had the team evenly split. If there was six programmers, there were 5 on in-game and 1 on out-game, it probably should have been split 50-50. That's a lesson we know now. So I think there was a number of factors. One was it was a young industry. People felt this desire to suffer for their art. We didn't have very good project management tools or any real kind of discipline around what we were doing. So there was a lot of people laboured on things that then might get thrown away later, for example. There was no concept of things like fail fast and so on. And then the net result was you do long hours and you do weekends. And the problem with that, as we stated not that long after we got into this kind of mess, is pretty simple. And it's the analogy we would use, and I would still use actually, is imagine yourself and you've got to have surgery. And you can choose surgeon A or surgeon B. Surgeon A is doing 120 hours a week, sleeping in the hospital, very rarely any social life. Surgeon B does 40 hours a week, plays golf with his friends at the weekend, sees his kids, reads them a bedtime story. Who do you want doing surgery on you? You want surgeon B, right? The one who's rested and relaxed. Who do you want writing code that won't be buggy and won't fall over? If they were the same 2 people, you want the one that's rested and relaxed. So there's a big false economy with crunch. And once you get into the cycle of it, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, sadly. But once you get out of the cycle, actually you can manage things pretty well.
Okay. And how did you get from that cycle that you started with to the new one then? Or how fast did you feel it develop?
It was slow. So the second project I was on that was very crunchy was called The Getaway. And it was, interestingly, I think another thing that happens is if you're making some form of entertainment, then the values of the thing you're making often spill out into the workplace. So if you're making a soccer game, it's all about, the team have done this or whatever. Whereas if you're making a gangster game with lots of swearing, the office turns into a pit of gangsters who are all swearing. And that we had quite a brutal head on that project, and he So, he would insist that everybody worked till 9 o'clock at night at least. And to facilitate that, he would bring in pizza or food, or even at one time he brought in a chef. But it was brutal. But actually what you noticed happened was that a lot of people did very little mid-afternoon because they knew they were going to be there till 9 o'clock. So it didn't really change people's input to the project. But how did we change is a great question. And it was really more about, it took quite a lot of time. It also took people to start having families, where if you're a 25-year-old person living in London, probably not on that much money, actually hanging around till 9 at night in the office and getting your dinner and then going for drinks, not that bad a lifestyle. But that same person 5-6 years later, they've got married, they've got a young child or 2 young children. They don't want that lifestyle. They want to get back and see their baby before they go to sleep, etc. So certainly there was a will from within. There was also, I personally suffered. I had towards the end of a project, I had to just take some time off, I think it was a week, because I just couldn't. It was like a broken arm. I couldn't function anymore. So there was sort of suffering of the troops, if you like, or of the people at the coal face. But I think there was also an understanding that we needed new models and new methods to plan making games. So, you might be on a game for 2.5 years and not see the end in sight because nobody had really worked out how much was required and what was required and what wasn't required. Did we need multiplayer support? Did we need 27 levels, or did we only need 20 levels? What were those parameters even weren't worked out at the beginning. So there was a sort of science to it as well in terms of just what the businesses funding games really wanted was better and more accurate predictions of the time and cost of game development. And rather than just people throwing random numbers around and then crunching and working late, they actually wanted people to be a bit more mainstream and a bit more understanding. Okay, we think it's going to be 2 years from now. Okay, well, if it's 2.5, we can live with that. But what we don't want is it's going to be a year from now. Oh, no, another year from now. Oh, no, another year from now, because you can't plan around that. And there was many times when the media spend, they might have to book the media spend 6 months before the game release, only to discover that the game then gets delayed. The media spend has been wasted. So there was a certain amount of science around it as well. So it wasn't all just out of the goodness of people's hearts. It was also there were valid commercial reasons for changing it. Still happened. But many people have talked about the work-life balance. You can't go on. You might be able to do 1 or 2 projects like that before burning out, but you can't do a whole career like that. But also, quite a lot of the time people were wasting time with what they were developing. And they were developing something that would later get cut out of the final game. So, it was just bad management, really. I think the concept of agile development made a big difference. That's where instead of saying we have this much time to do this, you break the project down into 2-week sprints or a short amount. It might be 4 weeks or something. And then within that, you say, right, these are the goals we're going to try and hit in this 2 weeks. And then after the 2 weeks, you go, did we get them all? Yes, no. Does some need to carry on? What are we going to do next? So you had much more of a North Star, but less of a very prescriptive projects that you were building.
Wow. Very insightful. Well, if you could, I would love to hear what it personally was like for you to work during crunch time, right? You said you ended up with feeling almost like a broken arm. And so I would love to hear what it was like. Did you feel it during? Did you feel it coming on? Or were you kind of taken aback once it happened and everything concluded?
I think at times I can be an anxious person. And I think that anxiety of... ultimately, right, here's what, to my mind, what the nub of everything is whether or not you feel in control of your life. Mm-hmm. And if you feel in control of your life, you don't feel as anxious. Mm-hmm. And you feel generally better. Now, that's obviously coupled with, if you are anxious, you try and put more hours in to resolve that anxiety. But if it goes beyond the horizon, if you just cannot see, or all you can see is failure, like 100% because you've never got enough hours in the day to get the work done that's in front of you, then you can get very demoralised, and then I think you can go down in a spiral, basically. And at that time, I was at the end of a project. I remember our lead programmer was like, working probably, I'd say 18 hours a day and sleeping in the office for the other 5-6 hours. And he was saying to me, oh, but, I can do this. Surely you can. It's like, well, I live further away. I've got a train to get home. I'm married. We don't have a child yet, but, I've got this other life that I have a responsibility for. And it was an interesting learning about crunch, which is you might think you can do it. Why can't they? But everybody's different and everybody's life is different. So it felt like there was no hope, I think. That was it. I could probably could cope with the hours. It was the anxiety of this imagine a pile of forms you've got to process that goes up to the sky, and you feel like you're never going to get to the end of it. It was that really got me. Now, it might be different for somebody else, but that's how it felt to me. And I did have a few days off and then went back and I was a lot fresher. I really noticed something as well after a while, which was I'd be sitting at my desk, a programmer would get into flow state programming. He'd be trying to debug something. The program's not behaving as I thought it would. And I'd be like banging my head against a wall. And then I noticed if I went home and came back, I'd fix it in 10 minutes. Because fresh mind, fresh outlook, you just go. I mean, there's that famous quote, isn't there? Definition of stupidity is repeating the same thing and expecting different results. And for debugging code, for example, that's the sort of thing that you get into. It's like, well, it should work. You keep sort of doing it and tweaking the edges, and then the next day you come in and you go, oh, of course I've done that, and I need to do that. So, that really highlights the sort of concept of being burned out and tired at the end of the day for me. But ultimately, the way through it is to be in control of your surroundings and your life.
Yeah, and I just want to add to that. What also supports this is maybe not the actual control, because some things are not in your control, but the perceived control, so the locus of control.
Yeah.
And I think that's maybe also what you're saying, right? You shifted some things around. You started to tackle the things that you can control, and then it felt more manageable.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's right. And also, I think the culture around you, I think it's a good point about perceived control. It's also about perceived accountability. So, if you're in a position where there is the mountain of stuff and you can talk to your lead and say, look, I'm never going to get through all this, and they say, I hear you, we're going to get some help. It might take us 2 weeks, but you carry on as best you can until we get the reinforcements. You're going to feel a lot better. Because that problem has been shared and somebody's listening and taking, so it's those sorts of things. It's really, so control isn't the other thing, but it's the only thing, but it is about being heard, about people understanding that you are doing everything you can, within human reasonable capabilities. And so, I think that is also what helps.
Wow. And I heard you say before that the majority of the issues causing crunch was poor management, right? Is that correct?
Yeah, I wouldn't necessarily blame those people because we didn't have the management techniques. We didn't have the management techniques at that time, and so it was very difficult for those people to really understand. I just apologies about this. I need to do something. Right. My son keeps ringing me, and I don't know why. I've put it onto mute, but it keeps coming through.
Well, the pleasure of children. It's a good little segue of the things you can't control, right? Sometimes you just butt in, and that's it.
Yeah. Actually, that is one of the challenges with children, isn't it? I mean, they wake you up in the middle of the night and they stay awake and you can't control it, and that gets quite frustrating and quite stressful. So it's, similar mechanics of human life kicking in.
I can relate to that. My kid is 16 months old, so I'm still posed with getting up and sitting next to him until he can fall back asleep. So it's definitely something that's happened. Yeah, awesome. You've also worked on SingStar, right? Which is one of the... What was the experience like then?
So very interesting. So I think another another strand of this, of how we got out of it, was that games became these live services. So it started with things like football games come out every year. So it's like, okay, well, we have got some kind of cadence to this we need to work with that is part of the real world. But also SingStar became, we were releasing 10, 15 different versions of the game a year. So you couldn't have crunch, because it's not like you were making one game over 5 years and it was an opus and it was your life's work. We were making game after game after game. So we had to change into what's now called a live ops team. So, you're actually running this game as a live service, which means it's a bit like running a restaurant, running a theme park. You've got customers coming every day. You've got to help them. You've got to do what you can for them. You've got to deal with complaints. You've got to make somebody extra happy, and so on. And so that becomes a different kind of proposition for a workforce. But I actually think that has helped us quite a bit as well, because you just have to run that in a different way. You can't. There is no crunch, because every day is a delivery. So it kind of normalises it. And I think that actually helped. SingStar in particular was an amazing project to be on, because it was just so different at the time. I mean, I do feel that we can be credited with getting karaoke to take off in the West, particularly in Europe. I mean, there weren't karaoke bars before, and I'm sure it would have happened. But, we really did make it something that everybody did. The funny thing is, across Europe, there are two basic staples. One is people will play SingStar after the pub, because they've been to the pub and had a few drinks. And that was typical in the UK, but actually, and actually Southern Europe. But Northern Europe, where the alcohol's more expensive, people will play SingStar before the pub, and they'd have some drinks at home, play SingStar, and then go to the pub. Very similar, but slightly different behaviours. But nevertheless, I think it was such a joy to be part of a project that had such far-reaching effects and had so many fans. I just kind of created a really enjoyable experience for people, connected people at a very simple level around music.
Yeah, and then the live feedback that you're getting from this kind of servicing, right? You're saying you're running a restaurant, so you're getting a lot of feedback as well. Must tie into that whole passionate process of keeping this alive and improving it as you go, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So, it's these days we actually do quite a lot of work. Well, not quite a lot of work. We actually try and do this thing called fail fast, where you create the simplicity of a game and then test it out with people. And if it's not working, you give up. And if it is working, then you build on it. Rather than spending 5 years and making something and then discovering that nobody's interested.
So maybe let's zoom into the way that crunch is talked about today, and what you see happening in the industry right now around the topic and what is being done and what you think could be done to improve it even more.
Yeah, so it's definitely a known topic. It does still happen, unfortunately. People deal with stress in different ways, and it's probably, maybe it's the first reaction. As if you're a manager or running a team, the first reaction is to get people to work more, because you feel like that's going to solve the problem. But, we've sort of discussed it doesn't always. There is discussion about work-life balance. People understand now, whether they've got family life or other home life that's required. Actually, the pandemic has made a change, because a lot more people are working from home. So that can help, although it has other impacts. Sometimes people find it difficult to switch off. Sometimes, people find it hard to delineate between work and home. And there is the always connected problem now. So you might not be working, but you might get that difficult message at 11 o'clock at night that stops you sleeping, which can be just as bad. But actually, certainly so having been in a big corporation like Sony, where there's only so much you can do to change the culture, and then running an indie studio, my philosophy now is what I call people-first management. And by that, I mean, we put the person first, find out what their needs are. So if they need to pick up a child from school at 3 o'clock, or they need to walk the dog at 4 o'clock, or they need to go shopping at a certain time or do something, then all that's fine, right? All that's fine. We just want you to work, and we want you to be invested in what you're doing. We want to give you as much autonomy as possible within the constraints of commercial business. So, to use the tools that you want to use, or to have an impact on exactly how we shape a product, and so on. And so we just, in practical terms, work through how to do that. So we try to have our stand-ups, not before 9:30, so anybody who's on a school run can attend them, or some people might not be able to make it till 10, in which case perhaps the project they're on will move the stand-up to 10 o'clock. We manage people's time as best we can, and not just that, but also give people time to do some other things, try and make sure we do social events that people meet. But that's like a trade, really. We do all that, and then we expect people to manage themselves, put as much input in as they can, not be evil to anybody, not be, we avoid I call it the blame-a-thon. Something goes wrong, so, it's their fault. The finger goes out. It's like, it's nobody's fault. Forget about
directions.
That. Yeah, forget about that. It's not going to help anyone. What do we do moving forward? What do we do next? How can we get out of this situation? If somebody's not doing something, the chances are they need some help. It's not because they're lazy. The chances are they need some help because they don't know how to do it and they're scared, or there's some other issue. You need to get to the bottom of that. And I've found that if you do things this way, then, there's much more sort of loyalty and integrity from people. You trust them and you respect them, then I think you get a lot back. We will at times say to people, we might need somebody to work this weekend, or we might need somebody to work tonight. And then we track that, and we give them that time back later. And that's actually how we manage that. It's a pretty simple system. We don't do it very often, and if we do need to do it, then we give them the time back. It's just time in lieu. And that works pretty well. I mean, you can't do it every weekend, but, projects do have their ebbs and flows, so you do need to have some flexibility. But, nobody's complained. People understand where we are with it. And I feel, in my heart, comfortable with that concept.
So you also said usually when people are not performing, or when they're getting quiet, etc., they usually need for help. Do you have something in place to spot that early enough so you can support them in the way that they need?
Yeah, I mean, just through regular communication. It will either be directly, but generally through the production team or through the manager of people. We'll find out if somebody's performance or something is dropping, and then we'll just talk to them. I mean, really talk, and actually more important, listen. Listen to people, find out what their issues are and see what we can do to support them.
So this is obviously a ideal scenario where you have created a culture and a community within DRI that allows you to have this good communication. If someone does not have this good communication, do you have any advice on how they can create that within their environment?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question, because it does. I think it does help if it comes top down. However, you can talk to your manager or your the people on the same level as you, or other managers within your organisation. I think probably most bigger organisations will have somebody who would champion this kind of way of working, at least in part. And I think it's just about influencing them to ensure that it encompasses your work. And ultimately, if it's there is that old saying about have the strength to change what needs to be changed, and the wisdom and the power and the patience to accept what can't be changed, and the wisdom to know the difference. And if you think it's not going to change, maybe you want to look for another environment. I mean,
very stoic.
no project is worth you suffering too much for.
Yeah. What do you think keeps people to change? Obviously, they're afraid if they might not land another gig, but what causes an individual to stay a little too long and burn out in that environment?
Well, I think it is a bit of anxiety and pressure, and sometimes some people don't have other things that they need to do, so they can do that. So, I don't think we need to limit. I mean, some people, particularly creative people, they want to work and equally, you're being just as mean, stopping them. And I don't mean that I want to take advantage of people. I absolutely don't want to. But I just mean, if you're getting into a creative endeavour and you get into a flow state doing it, you might want to give yourself that time. That's fine. Just make sure it doesn't have a negative impact on that person's life, whether that's their, eating or relationship with partner or whatever, and make sure that you manage that part of it as well, so that there's no negativity around that.
Have you seen any companies, whether it's small scale indie studios or the big guns, implement support systems in a way for exactly those individuals to go and have these flow states, creating the things that they really love, but then supporting by any means possible to maintain the physical and mental health in general?
Yeah, I mean, I think, even when I was at Sony, we would try and do this to a certain extent. We would, for example, some people don't take holiday. Just don't take holiday. And that's one thing where I would wrestle a little bit with people, say, look, I really do need you to take some holiday now. You've got to have a break, And that can actually be a little bit frightening to those people. But I think it's a point where that's something that we do need to say, look, we really want you to take some holiday now. And there's going to be a natural break maybe over the Christmas break or over one of the bank holidays and so on. And you just sort of work with people to make sure that they do get some downtime. So I think that is the case there. But also I think the change to people working from home a lot more, making sure people have a good setup at home. So there's a kind of weird challenge that if you have a hybrid system where people are in the office and working from home, you kind of need twice the compute power because you need two setups. So, making sure that those things are in place can be a big help to people as well. It seems quite odd now that there was a time when we would make everybody get onto a train underground and crush in with headphones on, to go into an office, to put headphones on and be cramped up in a desk to do work that they can do at home. I'm not saying I believe in only working from home. I'm just saying it seems quite odd that was a thing that we did. Actually, the real benefit of being in an office or in a space of work is communication, working on something. I mean, we have team days and, I think a few weeks ago we were all in this room I'm in now. We had one of our prototype games on the screen. Everybody was playing it, talking about it. It was amazing to be in the same space to do that. But then to go and create another level or to go and do some of the coding around it probably is sensible to be at home in a nice environment. If you've got a nice environment at home. I think one of the other challenges we did see actually is that some of the younger team members would be working in their bedroom because they're in a shared house. Just come out of university, that sort of thing, and that can be a bit of a challenge. It's like that's not a great life to. It's nice for people to have a divisible space between work and home. So what we've now come to a point where we can offer some office space to people who want it, but it's not a requirement. So I think that's that, and I think that happens in some of the bigger studios as well.
Yeah, and I think the recent events has really shown that there's a lot of benefits from working from home. There's more freedom and the flexibility to do either. But I want to highlight this one study that I've recently seen, that it should not be underestimated, the social impact of having coworkers. And as you said, this communication and having a place that you belong. We spend a lot of time at work, and so having a good place to communicate to your peers and colleagues is really crucial for your mental health in a way.
Yeah, I think that is, just as at the early days we didn't have the right tools to manage building an interactive product. At the moment, I don't think we have the right tools for a remote workforce. So it's like we're going through another renaissance, if you like, of how to understand the best practice for that. We not suffered, but in the pandemic, we hired people around the world, and it was great because we had all this diversity and different viewpoints and so on. But then it's not great because some of them I've never met. We have a great programmer in Texas, never met him. I've got a programmer in Barcelona, not met in person, and so on. And you're absolutely right. Having this sense of belonging, we are social animals, as we know, and having those needs met through work is very important. And it's harder through a screen, no doubt about it.
Great. I want to, as a last topic, maybe circle back onto management and the way that you've managed to change and evolve in a way that allows you to not crunch, or at least have periods of work that are intensive followed by periods that are not so intensive. What are the key practices that you've seen around the management space that really has made the difference for both you and DRI, but also in general in the industry?
I actually think time in lieu is a really sensible and pragmatic approach that a number of companies take now, because you can see that the company's taking it seriously, and that there is a future cost that they're willing to pay back, because they need this stuff to happen, the work to happen now, and it feels like a pretty amicable agreement between the sort of people working and the management. I think one of the things I think doesn't work actually, which has happened recently, is this concept of unlimited holiday. And it's often like sold as hey, come to this company, take as much unlimited holiday. And in practice, people don't take enough. And their holiday, if they do take time off, it gets bunched around. A friend of mine joined a big company recently that have that, and he said, I've been trying to take this day off for ages. It keeps getting pushed around because of meetings that come in that only that time people can make. So, I think that's something, it's a false economy that we're learning. It sounds great, but in a bit more detail, it doesn't actually work in practice. So we've never done that. I have considered it, but actually I'm not sure I will go with it because I've heard too much negativity around it now. There's another one that's quite interesting that people have tested, and they seem to be getting good results, of doing a 4-day week, which I'm maybe a little bit more open to. Although, ironically, I think our practice of being very flexible with people, it might not work as well. We might go against the grain with that. But I think that's quite interesting as well. So, it was a 6-day week, wasn't it? It was a 7-day week. It was a 6-day week for a long time. And kind of now it's more of a 5-day week for most people, I think. Maybe it is a natural progression over the next 50 years to be a 4-day week. Yeah. Perhaps that makes it that bit easier.
I think science also supports that. There's an average of productivity drop around 35 hours a work week. It doesn't need to be 4 days, but you could split it in any way possible to still accommodate. Yeah. But I think that is the right direction, definitely, to ensure that the amount of work you put in is something of value and not just hours spent at your desk.
Yeah. And I'm not really interested in hours spent at a desk. I'm interested in people. I actually want people to be happy. It's really simple. But if you feel that, people are happy with work and they're enjoying it, then that's the best possible outcome, and they will do a good job. It's a simple relationship and a positive one.
All right, Dave, we're coming to a close here. I would really appreciate you to just take this time to put a shameless plug, tell people what you want to tell them, just whatever you feel like saying right now. This is your time. You've said plenty, but I think you have so much more to offer. So there you go.
All right. Well, thank you very much. Well, Dream Reality Interactive, we're a growing company. We're always looking for interesting people to work with. We're very diverse, not just in our sort of cultural backgrounds, but in our capabilities as well. So, and we pride ourselves on being a nice place to work and being nice to each other. That's ultimately, probably put it over profit a bit too much than I should, but I do. I just want to make a great team that enjoy what they're doing.
That sounds awesome. Well, if you're working that hard hour crunch somewhere, or just pushing yourself too hard and you're looking for the next spot, maybe look over at DRI. They might have the right spot for you. Thank you so much for listening in, and I will see you in the next one.